Get out of my house. I don't need a sick daughter. Those were the last words my father said to me before he shoved me out into an October storm and locked the door behind me. I was 15 years old. No coat, no phone, no money. Just my school backpack with an algebra worksheet inside and the rain already soaking through my sneakers. 3 hours later, his phone rang. It was the police. They said words like unconscious and route line and hypothermia, and they said my name. People told me later that his face went white as a sheet when he heard. By then, it was too late for all of us. My name is Sherry Walls. I'm 28 now, sitting in my small Boston apartment, watching the rain draw crooked silver lines down the window. Outside, car lights smear into blurry streaks. Inside, everything is quiet except for the low hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the old clock my grandmother insists is perfectly good, thank you very much. It just has character. There's a letter on my kitchen table. It's thin and cheap on nursing home stationery, the logo faded at the top. The envelope is addressed in handwriting I almost don't recognize. My father's hand used to be strong and sure, each letter pressed hard into the paper. These letters wobble, some tilt, like they couldn't quite stay upright. After 13 years of silence, my father wants to see me. He says he's dying. He says he's sorry. The rain outside gets heavier, pinging against the glass. Funny thing about rain, it's a time machine. It doesn't matter how old I get or how far I move. A certain angle of gray sky and cold water on glass always pulls me straight back to one night. October 14th, 2011. The night everything in my life snapped loud enough for everyone to hear. I close my eyes and suddenly I'm there again. It was a Tuesday. There's something about that detail that still bothers me. Tuesdays are supposed to be forgettable. Mondays get all the drama. Fridays get all the anticipation. Tuesdays just exist. They're the filler episodes of the week. I remember walking home from school that afternoon with one strap of my backpack slung over my shoulder, ignoring the health teacher's warning that I'd wreck my spine. My mind was busy replaying the algebra test I'd just taken, mentally circling the one question I was sure I'd messed up. I was thinking about totally normal things. What was for dinner? Whether I had time to watch an episode of something before starting my homework, or if I should finally spend my birthday money on that band poster at the mall or save it for something more practical, like my grandmother always said. If someone had tapped me on the shoulder on that walk and told me that in less than 2 hours I'd be wandering down a highway in a storm, wondering if I'd freeze to death before I reached the next mailbox, I would have laughed. I stepped through our front door and knew instantly something was off. There's a feeling a house has when people have been fighting. The air feels thicker, like it's holding on to every word that got thrown around. That's what I walked into. My father was standing in the living room in front of his recliner instead of sitting slumped in it. That was the first alarm bell. Dad and that recliner had a long-term relationship. Seeing him upright, away from it, was like walking in on a dog balancing on its back legs at the counter. Wrong. Unsettling. His face was flushed, the color of raw meat left too long on the counter. His jaw muscles twitched under the stubble. In one hand, he clutched a wad of cash. In the other, 3 empty orange prescription bottles with their white caps off, rattling softly as his hand shook. Behind him was my sister Karen, 19 years old, 4 years ahead of me, and thoroughly rehearsed in the role of perfect oldest child. She had her arms wrapped around herself like she was barely holding it together. Her eyebrows were knitted with just the right amount of pain. Her lower lip trembled. If you had walked into that room cold, you would have seen a heartbroken older sister who had just discovered some terrible truth about her baby sister and was bravely doing the right thing. I might have believed it myself if I hadn't seen her eyes. Karen's eyes were always the giveaway. They never quite matched whatever expression she had arranged for the rest of her face. That day, over the trembling mouth and the heartbreak, there was a tiny shine in her gaze that did not look like sorrow. It looked like satisfaction. Off to the side, leaning against the kitchen doorway, was my stepmother, Jolene. arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin, nervous line, saying nothing. That was Jolene's specialty: silent, motionless, present but never really involved, always close enough to say later, well, I was there, but never close enough to have to take responsibility for anything. I didn't even have both shoes across the threshold when my father exploded. "What is this?" he shouted, shaking the cash at me so hard the bills fanned out. My backpack was still half on my shoulder. My heart did a weird lurch. I looked from him to Karen, to the pill bottles, back to him. "What is what?" I said, because I genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. He held up the bottles and shook them, the sound of plastic on plastic loud in the tense room. "You've been stealing from me," he thundered. Spit flew from the corner of his mouth. "Out of my wallet, from my account, for months, buying pills, hiding them in your room. Your sister found them. She found everything." Words were being thrown at me that didn't make sense. Stealing, pills, months. I blinked, my brain scrambling to catch up. "I haven't," I started. "Don't you lie to me," he roared. Spit flew from the corner of his mouth. "Your sister showed me the cash in your dresser, the pill bottles in your closet. She showed me text messages with some dealer. She has been trying to help you, Sherry. She has been covering for you, but I will not have a junkie under my roof." Junkie. The word landed like a slap. It felt absurd, wrong. I'd been overwhelmed by school and grief and normal teenage drama, sure, but my rebellion extended as far as listening to music too loudly and occasionally rolling my eyes. I didn't even like taking Advil. Karen took a little gulp of air, like this was all painful, but she just had to get through it. "I tried to talk to her, Dad," she said, voice soft and full of tears. "I really did. I told her this was serious, that she needed to stop, but she just kept doing it. I didn't want to tell you. I know you've been under so much stress, but I couldn't watch her destroy herself like that, not after Mom." Her acting was flawless. It would have been almost impressive if it hadn't been about me. She didn't look at me while she spoke. She kept her eyes on Dad, which made sense. He was the audience that mattered. I finally found my voice. "Dad, I didn't steal from you," I said. "I haven't taken any pills. I don't even know what those are. I've never seen that money. Karen is—" I stopped. Not because I believed her, but because I looked at my father's face and realized something terrible. He had already decided. His eyes weren't searching for truth. They weren't even confused. They were hard, closed, locked onto the story that hurt him the least. Karen had spent the whole day priming him, spoon-feeding him lies wrapped in fake concern. By the time I opened the front door, the verdict was in. "Enough," he snapped. He dropped the bottles on the coffee table. They rolled sideways and clinked together. Then his hand shot out, clamping around my upper arm. His fingers bit into my skin. I yelped, more from surprise than pain, as he dragged me toward the door. "Dad!" My backpack slipped completely off my shoulder and thudded onto the floor. "Dad, listen to me. I didn't—" He hauled the door open with his free hand. The late afternoon sky had turned an ugly, stormy gray in the time I'd been at school. Rain already came down in cold, thin sheets. Wind pushed it sideways, stinging my face even from the shelter of the doorway. The air smelled sharp and metallic, like wet asphalt and something electric about to break loose. My father turned me to face him and shoved my backpack into my chest so hard I stumbled back a step. "Get out of my house," he said. His voice was low now, almost calm. That was somehow worse than the yelling. "Dad, please," I tried, reaching for him with my free hand. "Can we at least talk? You didn't even—" He pushed. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a physical, deliberate shove that sent me backward over the threshold and onto the porch. My heel caught on the little ridge between linoleum and wood, and I windmilled my arm to keep my balance. The door slammed. My fingers hit the wood a split second too late. I grabbed the doorknob and yanked. Locked. I heard the heavy clack of the deadbolt sliding home. That sound is burned into my memory as clearly as my own name. I stood there, dripping. breath coming fast, staring at the door like I could will it to open again. It didn't. I waited. 1 minute, 2. Rain pounded on the porch roof. Water dripped from my hair down the back of my neck, already cold enough to make me shiver. My socks felt squishy in my sneakers. Any second now, I told myself, just any second the door will open and this will be the kind of cruel joke families talk about awkwardly in therapy someday. No one opened the door. My phone was on my desk upstairs, plugged into the charger where I'd left it that morning. I hadn't been allowed to go back for it. Jolene's silence from the kitchen made sure of that. What did I have? A backpack with textbooks, 1 half-eaten granola bar, a couple of pens, my student ID, a crumpled receipt. That was it. No jacket, no umbrella, no money, no way to call anyone.
My brain tried to sort options. Ring the doorbell until someone broke, go to a neighbor's and explain everything, sit down on the porch and refuse to move. All of those plans had one thing in common. They relied on the hope that someone on the other side of that door, or within shouting distance of that house, might choose me. I already knew better. My legs moved before my mind had fully decided what I was doing. Muscle memory took over. There was one place I associated with unconditional safety: my grandmother Dorothy's house, 7 miles away. I went down the porch steps into the storm. I didn't bother to look back. It's funny how, in the moment, distances you've only ever traveled in a car feel imaginary. 7 miles is a quick drive. You barely register it between songs. On foot, in a storm, as the temperature drops and the sky presses down, 7 miles stretched out in front of me like a dare from the universe. I cut through neighborhood streets I knew by heart, passing houses where porch lights were already on, warm rectangles of yellow spilling onto tidy steps. Somewhere behind those lit windows, other families were eating dinner, arguing about homework, watching TV. I walked faster. By the time I reached Route 9, the quiet grid of our subdivision had given way to a wide, busy roadway. No sidewalks, just a narrow strip of gravel at the edge, and then a shallow ditch. Car headlights hissed by in long, bright streaks, spraying arcs of filthy water from their tires as they roared through puddles. I kept to the edge of the gravel, my backpack heavier with every step. Rain hammered my face, plastered my hair to my scalp, turned my hoodie into a sodden, freezing weight. After the first mile, my jeans were soaked through from the bottom up. The denim clung to my legs like wet paper. Every step made a squelching sound inside my sneakers as my socks sucked in and squeezed out icy water. After the second mile, I couldn't feel my fingers. My hands were curled into fists around my backpack straps, but they didn't feel like mine. Pins and needles shot through them whenever I tried to flex. After the third mile, my jaw hurt from clenching. My teeth shattered so hard I worried they'd chip. But where was I going to go except forward? Back home? To stand on the porch again, knocking on a door someone had locked in my face? Some part of me realized even then that going back wasn't just about the weather. It would have meant walking back into a story where I was the villain no matter what I said. At least the storm was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything but what it was. The strangest thing about hypothermia is how quietly it sneaks up on you. There's no dramatic warning, no sirens, no flashing lights, just a very slow shutdown. The cold stops being sharp at some point. It becomes a kind of numbness that's weirdly gentle. Your body starts muting its own alarms. My legs felt heavy and disconnected, like I was moving someone else's limbs through waist-deep water. My thoughts got fuzzy. I remember thinking very clearly that I would just walk until I got to Grandma's, and then somehow, simultaneously, that I desperately needed to sit down for a second. Just a minute, I told myself, just until my legs stop trembling, just until I catch my breath. Up ahead, past the smear of rain and headlights, I saw a mailbox, leaning slightly from years of being bumped and leaned on.
I focused on it like it was a finish line. Get to the mailbox, then rest, then keep going. I never made it. My knees buckled before my brain fully processed that I was falling. The gravel shoulder rushed up. My palms hit first, then my hip, then my cheek. Individual stones dug into my skin, sharp and cold. The world shrank and went dark around the edges, collapsing inward like someone was slowly turning off a dimmer switch. Then suddenly someone cut the power completely. No rain, no headlights, no thoughts, just nothing. 3 hours after my father shoved me into that storm, his phone rang. He probably was in his recliner. The recliner always got him like gravity eventually gets everything else. Maybe the TV was on, throwing blue light across the room while his mind tried not to think about what he'd just done. He answered without looking at the caller ID. "Hello? Mr. Walls? This is Officer Daniels with County Police." Officers have a particular tone when they call you, calm, precise, like they're handing you a package that might explode. "Your daughter Sherry was found unconscious on Route 9, signs of hypothermia. She's at County General Hospital. And, sir, Child Protective Services has been notified. A caseworker is already there. We'll need you to come down and bring whatever evidence you say you have." I don't know what he said back. I only know how his face looked when people replayed it for me later, like a man suddenly realizing he'd been walking across a frozen lake, not solid ground. But the really important thing that night wasn't happening in my father's living room. It was happening on the side of Route 9. Her name was Gloria Hensley. 67 years old, silver hair pulled back in a tidy bun, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She'd spent 35 years working for Child Protective Services before retiring. 35 years walking into houses where children flinched at sudden movements, where refrigerators were empty, where parents told smooth or panicked lies to cover the bruises on their kids. She'd earned every line on her face. That night she was driving home from her weekly book club meeting, her mind half on the lukewarm coffee they'd served, half on the novel they'd been arguing about. It was raining hard enough that her wipers could barely keep up. She leaned forward a little, peering through the wet smear of glass, scanning the road ahead out of habit. Her headlights swept across something that didn't belong. A small, crumpled shape on the gravel shoulder. Too big to be a raccoon, too still to be an animal at all. She hit the brakes. Her fishtailed slightly. The anti-lock system caught, stuttered. She pulled over to the side and slapped on her hazard lights with the muscle memory of someone who had done this kind of thing too many times. The door flew open. Rain knifed in as she stepped out. She had an emergency kit in her trunk. She always had. Old training dies hard. An emergency blanket, a flashlight, basic first aid supplies. Her shoes slid a little on the slick gravel as she hurried over to where I lay face down, my hair spread around my head in a dark, wet halo. "Lord help us," she muttered, kneeling beside me. Her fingers went to my neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. My skin felt like wax under her hand. My lips had a bluish tinge. She recognized the early stages of hypothermia instantly. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, even though I couldn't hear her yet. "Not your time, not tonight." She rolled me onto my back, her knees digging into the gravel. She tore open the emergency blanket and wrapped it around me, tucking it under my shoulders and chin, trying to trap what little heat I had left. With her free hand, she fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, rattling off our location with crisp efficiency. When the ambulance arrived, lights screaming and siren wailing, she helped load me in and then climbed into the front seat without waiting for an invitation. "They can't leave you alone," she told my unconscious body, "until I know who let you end up like this." When I woke up 4 hours later, I was in a hospital bed, the world bright and washed out, the air filled with beeping of monitors and the antiseptic tang of disinfectant. I blinked. The world resolved into shapes. A scratchy blanket up to my chest, an IV taped to the back of my left hand, a heart monitor line squiggling steadily on a small screen. and a woman sitting in a plastic chair beside my bed, a book closed in her lap, watching me with calm, sharp eyes. She smiled when she saw my confusion. "There you are," she said. Her voice was steady, low, the kind you instinctively trust. "Welcome back." She held out a white paper cup with a plastic lid. "Hospital coffee," she said. "It tastes like burnt regret, but it's hot." I took it. My fingers shook. The warmth seeped into my hands and spread up my arms like someone had turned the temperature up from the inside. I took a sip and made a face. It really did taste like regret. She laughed, a short huff of amusement that made the lines around her eyes deepen. "There we go," she said softly. "I wanted to make sure there was still a person in there." I had a million questions, but the one that came out was, "Who are you?" "Gloria," she said. "I'm the nosy old lady who found you on the side of the road. Retired CPS. Bad habit of sticking around when I'm not technically required." She leaned back a little, studying me. "So, why was a 15-year-old girl in sneakers and a school backpack walking alone on Route 9 in this weather with no coat and no phone?" My throat ached. My voice sounded raw, like it had been dragged across gravel. "My father kicked me out. He thinks I'm a junkie." I expected him to wince, to ask if maybe he was right, to look at me like I was something dangerous. He didn't. He tilted his head. "Do you have any idea why he thinks that?" "My sister," I said. I felt my chest tighten around the word. "She planted things. Pills, cash, fake texts. She's been lying about me for years." Once I started talking, it was like a dam broke. I told her everything. The disappearing homework, the lost permission slips, the way Karen always managed to be in just the right place with just the right story. I told her about my mother's death and the black hole my father had fallen into afterward. I told her about how Karen stepped in and everyone called her a hero while I got smaller and smaller in my own house. I told her about the trust funds, the claws, the sports car, Trent. Words poured out in a messy, stumbling stream. I kept waiting for the skepticism, the "are you sure?" the "but she's your sister." It never came. Gloria listened, really listened. Her brow furrowed at some parts, her mouth thinned at others, but she didn't interrupt. When I finally ran out of words, my throat dry and my head pounding, she sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "I believe you, and I'm going to help you prove it." Those 7 words did something inside me I didn't even know was possible. They straightened something that had been bent and twisted for years. While I'd been unconscious, the hospital had done what it was supposed to do. A minor child found alone in dangerous conditions, that triggers a call to law enforcement. Law enforcement calls CPS, which is how Maria Santos, CPS caseworker with 30 years of hard-earned instincts, ended up sitting in the corner of my hospital room with a notepad and a file already started in my name. It's also how Officer Daniels ended up calling my father. "Mr. Walls, your daughter Sherry was found unconscious on Route 9, signs of hypothermia. She says she was expelled from your home earlier this evening during a storm." My father and Karen finally showed up at the hospital around 10:15 p.m. By then, I was propped up slightly in bed, swaddled in blankets. Gloria sat in the chair next to me, arms crossed. Maria sat on the other side with her file. A uniformed officer leaned against the far wall, arms loosely folded, eyes taking everything in. The door opened. My father stepped in. He looked confused and annoyed, like someone had dragged him out of an important meeting, not like someone whose child had nearly died. Karen hovered behind him, her face pale but composed. He stopped at the sight of all the people in the room. "What is all this?" he demanded. "Mr. Walls," Maria stood. "I'm Maria Santos with Child Protective Services. This is Officer Clay. We need to talk about what happened tonight." I already told the officer on the phone. His gaze flicked to me, and something like discomfort passed over his face. My daughter has been using drugs. We found pills, cash, messages. We had to take action. Maria's pen moved slowly across her pad. And by take action, she said, you mean you expelled a minor child from your home at night during a storm with no coat, no phone, no money? He shifted his weight. We thought she'd go to a friend's or cool off for a while and come back. We didn't think she'd wander off. Gloria let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a snort. Maria's eyes flicked toward her, then back to my father. Did you call the police when you discovered these alleged drugs? A doctor? Anyone? No, This is a family matter. I was trying to deal with it privately. Karen stepped forward, voice soft and wet with tears. We tried everything. I begged her to stop. I offered to go to meetings with her. I wanted to tell you sooner, Dad, but I didn't want to stress you more. She wouldn't listen. Maria watched her the way a scientist might watch an unfamiliar insect, with curiosity and caution. Then my grandmother arrived. You could hear Dorothy coming before you saw her. Her shoes clicked down the hallway at a brisk, no-nonsense pace. She appeared in the doorway, small and solid as a tree stump, eyes sweeping the room in one quick pass. Her gaze landed on me first. She moved to my bedside like there was nothing and no one else in the room. Oh, baby, she breathed, cupping my face in her warm, calloused hands, her jaw tightening as she took in the hospital bracelet, the IV, the pallor of my skin. Only then did she seem to register my father. Her expression went from worried grandmother to righteous fury in half a heartbeat. She straightened, turning toward him. That's my granddaughter, she said to Maria, to the officer, to anyone who needed the information. What has this fool managed to do this time? Dorothy, my father said, voice tight, this is none of my business, she cut in. You throw my only grandchild out of your house in a storm and you think it's none of my business? You've lost what little mind you had. He sputtered. She's been stealing from me, doing drugs. Karen found... Dorothy held up a hand. Raymond, have you looked at a single bank record yourself? Have you checked those pills against any prescription? Have you done anything except listen to the one person in this house who benefits from making Sherry look bad? His mouth opened, closed, opened. Well, Dorothy said, there's your answer. She turned to Maria. What has to happen so that this man does not get to make any decisions about this child tonight? The hospital social worker appeared in the doorway, drawn to the noise. Maria summarized. The officer backed her up. Dorothy demanded an emergency custody hearing. It's nearly midnight, the social worker said uncertainly. Family court isn't... Judge Feldman owes me, Dorothy said. I sat through 12 years of PTA meetings with his wife. Somebody get me a phone. By 12:30 a.m., a sleepy but fully awake judge was on the line. The hospital faxed over written incident reports. Maria laid out the facts. A 16-year-old girl, expelled from her home without due process, no attempt to involve law enforcement or medical professionals, found unconscious with hypothermia by a retired CPS worker. The judge's voice was clipped and incredulous. He granted emergency temporary guardianship to Dorothy effective immediately. My father was barred from contact with me until and unless a full investigation cleared him. As we left, my father tried one last time to reach for me. Sherry, Dorothy stepped between us. You don't get to say her name, she said quietly. You had 15 years to be her father. You chose your recliner and your favorite daughter's lies. We're done here. She led me out, one hand light but firm on my elbow. The world outside the hospital was still wet and cold, but I was wrapped in 3 layers of blankets and Dorothy's stubbornness. She helped me into her old Buick, fussed with the seatbelt, and turned the heater up high enough for my nose to stop feeling numb. I don't have anything, I said as we pulled away. No clothes, no shoes. My school stuff is all. She patted my knee. You have me, she said, and I have a Target card. We'll figure out the rest. Dorothy's house felt like stepping into a different universe. It was small and cluttered in a cozy way, full of mismatched furniture and framed photos of people who had my eyes or my mother's smile. The air smelled like coffee and cinnamon and laundry detergent. She gave me the spare bedroom, which had been her sewing room. The bed was covered in a faded quilt. There was a dresser with slightly sticking drawers and a lamp that made a soft, warm pool of light. She dug out a stack of flannel pajamas that were too big and a robe that wrapped around me twice. She made soup and grilled cheese, setting the plate in front of me like it was the most important work she'd done all year. Between spoonfuls, I kept thinking, this is temporary. They'll take this away. Someone will say this is a mistake. It felt too kind, too solid.
Dorothy had 3 main rules for her house: breakfast at 8, homework before TV, and no heavy conversations before her second cup of coffee. Nothing good has ever come out of my mouth before that second cup, she said. Trust me. I stayed. The next day, she drove me to Target. We walked slowly up and down aisles, her pushing the cart, me still weak and shaky, but thrilled by the sight of new jeans, new socks, underwear that hadn't belonged to anyone else before. We're starting over, she said, flipping tags to check prices. You, me, and this 3-pack of t-shirts. We replaced what had been taken from me. Not just the physical things, though those mattered more than I'd realized. Having clothes that weren't chosen by Jolene or carried the smell of my old house felt like putting on a new skin. Over the next few weeks, a different kind of rebuilding started. Maria began her investigation in earnest. She visited Dorothy's house, sat at the same kitchen table where my grandmother paid her bills and did crossword puzzles, and asked me for every detail I could remember. Meanwhile, CPS and the police started looking into my father's claims. They examined the evidence I'd never been allowed to defend myself against. The $800 in my dresser traced back through bank statements to a single ATM withdrawal on October 14th, the very day my father threw me out. Surveillance footage from the ATM showed the truth. It was Karen standing there at 2:47 p.m., punching in my father's PIN number, scooping the cash out of the slot. At 2:47 p.m., I was in 5th period chemistry. My teacher remembered me. The school's electronic attendance log had me checked in until the final bell. The pill bottles in my closet? Prescription labels with the name Trent Barlow, filled at a local pharmacy for anxiety. Trent had filed a police report stating the pills had been stolen from his car. He filed that report 3 days after the night I was kicked out, 3 days after the bottles were supposedly discovered in my room. The dealer's burner phone? Bought 4 days before the storm, on October 10th, at a convenience store near Karen's gym. Security footage showed her at the counter in yoga pants and a hoodie, her white sedan clearly visible through the front window. The more Maria dug, the uglier the picture got. Bank records revealed 2 years of forged checks from my father's account. Small amounts most of the time, likely to avoid triggering alarms, then larger ones as Karen grew bolder. The money went to various accounts tied to Trent's sketchy business ventures. Total, just under $18,000. Karen hadn't panicked suddenly on October 14th. She'd been laying the groundwork for months. Dorothy, never one to do anything halfway, hired a lawyer. His name was Leonard Vance. He'd been practicing family law since before I was born and knew my mother since they were 13. He came to Dorothy's kitchen one afternoon with a leather briefcase and a serious expression. He listened to the whole story, tapping his pen gently against his notepad, his eyebrows climbing higher with each new revelation. "Well," he said finally, sighing, "retirement was getting boring anyway."
He filed for permanent guardianship on Dorothy's behalf. He filed a civil suit against Karen for fraud, emotional distress, and whatever else he could make stick. He worked with my mother's original attorney to lock down my trust fund so tight not even an earthquake could shake money out of it early. While all that was happening behind the scenes, my day-to-day life shifted from survival to something that almost looked like normal teenagehood. I only get back to Dorothy's house a few times before college started, but it's the only place I've ever felt truly safe. I end up staying longer than I expected because Dorothy breaks her ankle on the way back from the mailbox and needs a bit more help around the house for a while longer. She's still bossy from her couch, sending me on missions to find certain books and make tea to her exact specifications, but now we laugh together more than ever before. The lawyer, Leonard Vance, has a funny set of extra teeth he wears for special occasions. We watch a movie together every Friday night, and Dorothy teaches me how to read a serious poker face. One Sunday, we go to brunch with a few of Dorothy's friends, and they ask me about my college plans as if I'm just another kid headed for a normal future. It's a big lesson in normalcy, one that I'm needed desperately. By the time I really have to leave for school, I finally feel like I have a family I can count on to return to. When I say goodbye, I don't feel sad in the same way I used to. Instead, I feel a lot more hopeful. I knew I'd never be the same after that night, but I didn't know I'd also be so much better. Dorothy teaches me that things break down so that something new can be built, even if it's painful in the process. She told me that the best thing that can happen is for a new family to be born from the ashes, and that's what happened.
Dorothy walked on one side of me, Leonard on the other. Gloria was there too, sitting quietly in the second row, her eyes kind and fierce at the same time. Karen sat at the respondents' table with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Her hair was pulled back too tight, her hands twisted in her lap. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. My father sat behind her, alone. Jolene stayed home. The judge, Patricia Morrison, had the look of someone who had seen every variety of family disaster and had no patience left for nonsense. The hearing was technically about guardianship, whether Dorothy should have permanent custody over me. In practice, it was about everything that had happened before that. The prosecutor moved through the evidence methodically. She projected the ATM footage on a screen, Karen at the machine at 2:47 p.m., timestamp at the bottom, my school attendance records showing me in class at the same time. She laid out pharmacy logs, Trent's prescription, his conveniently late theft report. She played the security camera video from the convenience store, Karen buying the burner phone. She submitted the bank statements showing 2 years of forged checks, the accounts they fed into, the sudden spike in withdrawals right before the storm. Then she read from Trent's confession out loud, in the quiet courtroom. Karen stared straight ahead, color draining from her face. When it was Karen's turn to testify, she took the stand like a condemned queen mounting the scaffold. She tried, at first, to stick to her original script. "I thought Sherry needed help," she said. "I was just trying to make Dad see how bad it was. The money, the pills. I never meant for her to get hurt, I just wanted—" The prosecutor slid a photograph across the desk. "Ms. Walls, is this you at First National Bank at 2:47 p.m. on October 14th? Karen glanced down. The angle wasn't the most flattering, but it was unmistakably her. Yes, she said, but I was getting money for groceries." "Groceries," the prosecutor echoed. $800 in cash for groceries. Did you tell your father about this withdrawal when he found that exact amount in your sister's dresser later that day?" Karen's throat worked. No sound came out. "And since your sister was in chemistry class 12 miles away at that time, can you explain how she could have made this withdrawal while you were also making it?" Karen's fingers twisted in her lap.
I don't remember the exact times. It was all a blur. The prosecutor didn't push further. She didn't need to. The room had heard enough. Jolene testified. She looked like she might fold herself into the witness chair and disappear if she could. When Karen went into Sherry's room the morning of October 14th, did she say why? Jolene said she needed a hair tie. Did she come out with one? Silence. No, Jolene whispered. 2 days before that, did you overhear any part of a conversation between Karen and Trent? Jolene closed her eyes for a moment. I heard her say, "Everything is in place." Then she laughed. When my father took the stand, he tried to hold on to what little dignity he believed he had left. He said he'd been tired, stressed, that he trusted Karen because she'd been responsible for so long, that he thought he was making a tough call. The judge listened. Then she spoke. Mr. Walls, parents do not get to abdicate responsibility and then defend their negligence as tough calls. You had an obligation to protect your minor child. You did not fulfill it. In fact, you actively endangered her. Her gaze flicked to Karen. Ms. Walls, your actions go beyond sibling rivalry or poor judgment. This was a calculated, premeditated attempt to destroy someone's life and steal from both her and your father. The court takes that very seriously. In the end, Karen took a plea to avoid a full criminal trial. Her sentence? 2 years, suspended. If she so much as sneezed on the law wrong during that time, she'd go to prison. 5 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, full restitution of the stolen household money, repayment of the $800 she'd planted in my dresser. She also got a permanent restraining order, no contact with me ever, no letters, no social media messages, no accidental run-ins within 500 feet, and a felony conviction on her record, one she'll carry into every job interview, every rental application, every background check. My father lost guardianship rights permanently. He was ordered to pay for my therapy and educational expenses, and to set up and contribute to a college fund. Dorothy was granted full, permanent custody. Ms. Walls, the judge said to me at the end, you've been remarkably strong under circumstances that would break many adults. I hope your future is kinder than your past. I wanted to say something clever, something like, it pretty much has to be, Your Honor, but my throat was tight, my eyes stung. I just managed, thank you. As we walked out of the courthouse, sunlight flooded the front steps. It was one of those early spring days that feels like a promise. Cold air, but the sun has teeth again. My father stepped forward like he was going to say something. Sherry, sweetheart, Dorothy shifted, blocking his path with surprising ease for someone her size. You don't get to call her that. You gave that up when you locked her out into a storm. We walked down the steps and didn't look back. The years that followed weren't a straight upward climb. Nothing ever is. Trauma is sticky. It clings even when you've changed clothes and addresses and phone numbers. There were nights, even in Dorothy's warm little house, when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, sure I was on the side of that road again, or back in my father's living room, his grip digging into my arm. Therapy helped. Time helped. Also did small, boring good days. I finished high school with honors. Dorothy cried so hard at my graduation that she needed an extra tissue box. She took about 100 photos on her actual camera because she still didn't trust smartphones. I went to college, not some impossibly expensive Ivy League, but a solid state school with a decent marketing program. I loved it. I loved the crisp feel of a new syllabus in September, the thrill of raising my hand in a lecture hall and realizing my voice didn't shake anymore, the quiet power of watching a plan I'd worked on actually move people. I interned at a tech company in Boston my junior year. At first, I fetched coffee and stapled packet after packet, but my manager noticed that I remembered details and cared about getting things right. After graduation, they offered me a full-time job. I started as an assistant, then a coordinator, then a junior manager. Today, I'm the marketing director. Every promotion felt like another brick in the foundation of a life I'd built entirely on my own terms, with a grandmother who believed in file folders and meatloaf and never letting people talk you into believing you're less than you are. Dorothy stayed exactly as Dorothy she'd always been. She still woke up at 6, still insisted breakfast was at 8 even when I wasn't living there anymore. If I slept over, she'd tap on the door right on time and say, "Up, the day is wasting without you." She still filed every important document into neat labeled folders: warranties, medical information, tax returns back to the early 90s. She called it paper insurance. After what we'd been through, I understood exactly what she meant. I met Colin at a charity gala. My company was sponsoring the event. I was technically there to schmooze donors, talk about brand alignment, and all the other phrases that sound like nothing but mean be charming enough that people associate our logo with warmth and generosity. Colin was there because he actually cared about the cause. He's a pediatric nurse, the kind of job who's dealing with kids in pain and parents on the edge, and somehow he still finds a way to be kind. We met at the bar. I was juggling a miniature plate of appetizers and a glass of red wine. He turned and knocked my elbow. Wine sloshed across the front of my dress, a dark, terrible stain spreading across the fabric. "Oh my God," he said, horror written across his face. I am so sorry. Napkins, here, I'll buy you a new dress. I'll buy you 10 new dresses. He grabbed a stack of cocktail napkins and started trying to dab at the mess, his ears bright red. I started laughing. It just bubbled up. I had months of careful, performative interactions. His pure, panicked sincerity was so real, so unpolished, that it cracked something open. He stopped dabbing and looked up, startled, then laughed too. We talked and talked. About the charity, about our jobs, about our grandmothers, actually. His had taught him to make chicken and dumplings. Mine had taught me how to read people in 5 minutes flat. We went on a date, then another. He met Dorothy and brought her flowers without me prompting him. She pretended not to be impressed, then called me later and said, "He can stay." 2 years later, he was on one knee in Dorothy's backyard, hands shaking so hard the ring almost tumbled into the grass. I said yes, of course. We set the date for the following spring. We decided to hold the wedding in that same backyard, under the maple tree I used to sit beneath with a book on summer afternoons.
Life was good, which is right about when the letter came. Dorothy called me one Wednesday afternoon. "I've got mail here for you," she said, "from some place called Maple Grove Care Center." My heart did that slow, uneasy roll again. I drove down that weekend. The envelope was on the table, thin, the paper cheap and a little translucent, the return address typed neatly in the top left corner. Maple Grove Care Center. Attention, resident Raymond Walls. The handwriting on my name was uneven, as if the person writing it had been fighting gravity with each stroke. I slid my thumb under the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. "Dear Sherry, I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything. I know you owe me nothing. You would be within your rights to throw this away without reading it, but I hope you won't. I'm at Maple Grove now. I had a stroke 2 years ago. My left side doesn't work great. The doctors say I won't be leaving here. Jolene is gone. She took half of what we had left and moved to Florida with an accountant she met online. The house is sold. The recliner is probably in a landfill somewhere. Sometimes I think that chair was my best friend for a while. That's how bad I was. Karen came to see me last week. I wouldn't let her in. I can't look at her without seeing what I did to you because I believed her. I was your father. I failed you. I believed lies over truth. I chose the story that made me feel like a good parent over the work of actually being one. I threw you out of my house like you were nothing. You were never nothing. If you can find it in your heart to come see me once,
I would like to say I'm sorry to your face before I go. Your father, Raymond. I read it twice. The first time, my chest felt tight, like someone had cinched a belt around my ribs. The second time, the words hurt less and landed more. Dorothy watched me over the rim of her mug. You don't have to go. Not for him. Not for anybody. You've built a good life without his help. I know, and I did. But I thought about my mother, about the woman who had set up trust funds and tried to build safety into our future as in her own body betrayed her. I thought about the night on Route 9, how it had almost been my last. I thought about the years I'd spent carrying a heavy, simmering anger. It had kept me warm sometimes. It had also made me tired. I don't want to do it for him, I said, finally. She nodded once. Then I'll drive you, she said. Maple Grove Care Center was clean in that way that tries too hard. Walls painted a neutral yellow, fluorescent lights buzzing quietly overhead, the faint smell of disinfectant and something sweet to try to hide the more human odors underneath. A woman at the front desk checked us in. She's been talking about this, she said quietly when I told her my name. Room 214. The hallway felt longer than it probably was. I paused at his door, hand hovering over the handle. The last time I'd seen him in person was in that courtroom, looking like a man who'd finally, painfully, seen the truth and didn't know what to do with it. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The man in the bed barely resembled the father I remembered. Stroke and time had rearranged him. His hair was thinner, his face sagged slightly on one side. One arm lay limp and curled on top of the blanket. The other reached slowly toward the glass of water on his bedside table and failed to reach it. His eyes, though, his eyes were the same muddy hazel eyes I'd spent my childhood searching for approval in. They met mine. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then his face crumpled and he started to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, quiet ones, tears leaking out of the corners of his eyes, his mouth trembling. "Sherry," he rasped, "you came." I stood there, just inside the doorway, my back almost against the wall. It took a second for my legs to remember how to bend. I moved to the chair by his bed and sat down. He wiped at his cheeks with the back of his working hand, then gripped the sheets, knuckles white. "I am so sorry," he said. The words came out uneven, some syllables slurred. "For that night, for every night before it, for not seeing you, for believing what I wanted to believe." He told me about the stroke, waking up unable to move, people feeding him, bathing him, how helpless he felt, and how in that helplessness he kept thinking about me at 15, standing on that porch while he locked the door. He told me he hears the deadbolt in his dreams. I thought, for so long, that I was the victim of Karen's lies, of life, of your mother dying. But I wasn't just a victim. I was a coward. I picked the easy story and stuck to it. I listened. He needed to say these things more than I needed to hear them, but hearing them did something anyway. "I forgive you," I said, when he ran out of words. He let out a shuddering breath. More tears slipped free. "But," I added, "it doesn't mean I forget what you mean for me." He nodded, eyes on mine. "It means I'm choosing to put this down. I've been carrying what you did like a backpack full of rocks for 13 years. It shaped me. It also weighed me down. I'm done letting it define every step I take." He swallowed hard. "You threw me out that night. Not because you had to, not because there were no other options, but because believing Karen made you feel like the good father of the good daughter. Believing me would have meant admitting you'd missed years of cruelty under your own roof." He shut his eyes. A tear rolled down into the creases of his skin. "Karen made you feel needed. I reminded you of Mom, of how much you'd lost. I get it. I really do. But understanding why you did it doesn't make it right. It just makes it human." I thought of Colin, of the way he listened when I talked about a hard day, of how he once left work in the middle of a shift to bring me soup when I'd texted that I was sick and trying to power through. I'm marrying a man who'd sooner set himself on fire than throw me into a rainstorm because someone told him I messed up. I built a career you had nothing to do with. I paid for my own life with money Mom made sure we had. I did all of that without you. I squeezed his working hand gently. You have to live with what you did. That's your burden, not mine anymore. He sniffed, tears slipping down into his gray stubble. I know, he managed. I just needed to tell you I am sorry. I needed you to know. We sat in silence for a little while. I told him about my job, how I like watching numbers on a screen go up because of something I wrote, how I still triple-check every email for typos because Dorothy drilled into me that details matter. I told him about Colin, about his work, about the way he tucks blankets around his tiny patients, the same way Gloria tucked that emergency blanket around me on Route 9. I didn't tell him everything. Some parts of my life felt too mine to share. After 20 minutes or so, he was tired. When I stood to leave, he reached out with his good hand, not to grab, just to touch. His fingers brushed my wrist. I let them rest there for a beat, then stepped back. In the hallway, on my way out, one of the nurses who'd checked us in earlier stopped me. "You're Sherry?" she said. "Yeah." She nodded toward his room. "Your sister came last week. We told him. He refused to see her. Got really upset, actually. Said he couldn't look at her without seeing what happened." I stood very still. For so long, I had been the expendable one, the one who could be thrown away to protect the golden child. The idea that in the end he'd drawn a line at Karen instead of me felt strange. It didn't undo the past, it didn't fix anything, but it was like waking up one day and discovering a scar you'd forgotten you had didn't hurt when you touched it anymore. It was just there. A mark, not a wound. I walked out of Maple Grove.